everyone, in this video we are going to talk about a topic that is a bit head scratcher, that is looping in Bubble. So if you are familiar with the bubble.io, you will also familiar. There is no native support for the looping available into the Bubble. But in this today video, we are going to cover not one, not two, but 4 different methods. How can you use loop into the Bubble? And we are going to break down all the pros, cons with each method and dive into the really detail. So let's start. Before jumping into how can you implement a loop into the Bubble, let me start with what exactly the looping is. Who is not from the technical background and that may face okay what exactly the looping and all. So as the name suggests, looping basically do some task multiple times, like looping a task. So for example, just I'm giving you a non-tech example. So let's suppose you are a class of student and all you need to do a same task. So what is that? That is the looping of the task. And in the computational world, so maybe you have a list and you want to store into the DB. So how can you do that? So that's a looping. So you will each one by one you will store the data into the table, and that's how looping works. But if you are familiar with the Bubble or like using Bubble for last 5 to 6 months, you figured out there is no direct way of doing the looping. There is no such loop element or loop action is there, right? If you are coming from the programmatic background, then you must have heard that term, and every programming language have the looping. I think yes, every programming language, be it a Java, Python, Kotlin, anything. So how you do that into Bubble? So let's start. Okay, in this video we are going to talk about 4 different looping methods. And so the first one is using do when 5 second. So let me show you how. We will create a first page. Looping. So in this method, what exactly we are going to loop? So we have one table, this event table, and this have a date and name. We are going to add the random string into the each row using all the 4 methods, and then we will see which one is better and why is better. So let's start. So our first method involves uses of do every 5 second method. So how can you do that? So okay, let's start. Let's suppose there is one button. Let's say start looping. Start looping using do every action. Okay, let's stretch it a bit. And when someone, what we need to do is we need to trigger this do every 5 second, and instead of 5 seconds we are going to take 0.01 so that it will be fast. You can change based upon your what action you are doing inside the loop for each item, but I'm just keeping it simple. So we have set it. What is the thing we are going to make changes to the list of things, and what is the thing that is going to change? Let me show you. Okay, we first need to create one custom state to store all the item that we are looping on. So that's basically a list of item that we are looping on. So in my case, it's simply all events, and that is going to be simple event, and that is going to be list. Okay, one more thing. One more variable we need. If you are familiar with the Bubble, so if you know do every, this action is continuously running. Even you do anything or not, it will continuously running at a client side. But since we want loop to start and stop at a particular time, so what we will do, we will create one action here. Let's say start loop and keep it by default. Keep it the yes and no, and keep it by default no. So by default there should be a no loop. Whenever I click on button, it should then loop. So what we do is simply click on this start looping, again edit workflow and set a condition, set state looping custom state start loop yes. So whenever I click on the button, it will start looping. But before that we need to do one more task, set state looping. We need to basically fetch all the events that he wants to run on. So simply do search for event. Yeah, that's it. All the event will be stored into this. Then this function will call. We need to put a only when condition so that it will force basically this condition to run only when someone click on the button. So what we'll do, simply looping. So we will use that custom state. Start loop is yes. Yeah. By default we can keep it or we can. Okay, what is the action we need to perform? We need to add the random string into each row. So how can we do that? Simply now, okay, we have chosen make changes to the things. So we need to pass one object like a per row. So how can we do that? Simply we know we have a list of all the data in our custom state looping all event, but we will use the first item. So what we do, every time we will loop, we will take the first item from it and make the changes whatever the operation that we need to perform on it. So first item is random string, and simply arbitrary test, simply random string, calculate formula, calculate random string, 11 character, use simple, done. Now interestingly, we have a write a condition to how to start, what need to perform on that list, but we have not list write a logic when this loop should stop. We will write that. So how we will write it? When this will loop will exit when it process all the list item, right? So it will be looping, start loop, and it should be no. And when it should be no? When looping all. Okay, one more thing we need to do is simply create one more set. So what we are doing, we are processing on the first item. So every time loop process, we need to remove that first item from the list so that it will not process again. So what we do is start loop, loop all event minus item, that will be looping all event first item, all event, yeah. Now it's perfect. So we and same all event count greater than 0. Now perfect. Let me revisit what we have done. Whenever someone click on the start looping button, we will first fetch all the list that we need to process on, and then we will set up custom variable value here so that it forced to start this condition. Once that condition is start, it will make changes into the event. Then the second step will be it will remove that item from the list because it already processed, and we will stop the loop once all the item is processed, right? Looping all event count is 0 basically means all the item is processed. So let's start. Just preview it. So if we just click on this button, it will process, and if we go into our DB and just refresh the data, you see all the random string has filled into the DB. Now it means our task is done and it's perfectly executed. Something about this method is this happen at a client side, at a browser level. So all the item and everything is visible to the user and everything. So that's the cons of this method, but the pros is it's working on a client side, so it's kind of fast. Now comes to our second method that involve a plugin that's called a looper. So if you go to plugin, simply search for the looper. So this is the plugin by Binny, and that we need to use it. Simply click on install, and we are going to do the same thing, like inserting that random string into this. So we emptied it, okay, and then we will again put a button, looping using plugin. So we will simply click on. Now we will say start. First we need to drag its element, that is simple looper. Drag it anywhere, it does not really matter, and then start looping. So same way, and we will first fetch the list of the item. So it will be set state looping all event, do search for, and then event. We have fetched all the item into our custom state, then start looping. It will start the loop, and here in the element action there will be one action, a looper flow to be repeated. It means the next iteration basically. Here we need to write what is the task that we need to perform it. Just copy it and simply paste it. Make changes to the things and looping all first item, or simply says item this looper current iteration number. So it basically plugin gives you the number at which we are at. So first it will be first, then second item, then third item. So we can leverage that to process, to fetch the particular item rather than deleting it from the list and then okay. Now we need to force it to the next iterate. When run next iterate. So when it will be next iterate, when this looper current iteration less than from the looping that our list looping all event count. So for example, we have a 4 item and my current iteration is second, like it's processing the second item. So it's a less than the total count. I need to force it to go to the next step, and I need to stop it. Finish looping. So finish looping basically happen when this simple loop current iteration is equal to my total number of the list. So that is looping all event count. Let me revisit what exactly we have set up it. So whenever this looper button is called, we will fetch the list like we have done in this like a first way. We will fetch the list on which we need to process it. Then we will say start the loop now. And then when we say start the loop, it will go here first time, only the first time. Then we need to fetch the item that need to be changed, or we need to run the task on. So looping all event item. So we know the current position. Okay, this is the first position, this is the second position of that looping. So we will use that simple looper current iteration number, and item on will give you the particular item, and we will just make the changes. And here we have written the condition to when it goes again to this, again simple loop repeated. It will not go automatically. So we will simply say run next item whenever this current iteration is less than equal to looping count, and it will finish when this simple looper current iteration is process equal to all the items. So let me just start, refresh this page. When I click on this looping using plugin and go to my data, refresh it, if you see all my random string is here, it means my list has been processed and my loop is worked 4 times. So that's how basically you can use this method. Again, this method is same working on a client side, and all your data will be exposed to the user. And I think better to use it because this gives you this simpler current iteration number that will help you to like finding the particular item and all. So that will be really helpful. But it's a plugin and you are depending upon the external plugin. So that's the caveat about it. So yeah, that's the second method. Now we are going to the third method. So if you kept in focus, all the 2 methods that we have done are happening at a client side. Your data is exposed and everything is there with that thing. But now the next 2 method is going to be on a back end so that your data will not expose. Okay, so this method we call it looping using a schedule or list. This is kind of most standard way of like a most native way, not a standard but most native way of looping into the bubble. In the backend workflow, someone click on this button, we will call this function schedule API workflow on a list. Okay, so that is kind of a loop. So here in the type of the things we need to pass what type of the list it is. So we will simply say event and the list to run. So we all have a simply do search for. We don't need to use a custom state and event. Yeah, that's it. Now the API workflow. API workflow is kind of what is the logic you need to perform on each item of the list. So first we go to write it. We will create a simply API workflow. Click on here and click on new API workflow. We will say update random string. Okay. Now here in the add parameter, it will have a event item. So we need to pass one item at a time, and this will be event, and simply call here make changes to the things event item plus random arbitrary calculate formula generate random string level, simply close it. That's it. So now if we come here in the API workflow, we need to update random string, and when you need to schedule it, so since we need to do it immediately, so what we will do current time and the interval is between the each row. Like first row will be processed, then what is the interval you need to wait for the second one to happen, then third one to happen, and bubble suggests the 5 second, and so we will pass 5. Anything below will be 5, it works, but it's not recommended by the bubble. So and each item we need to pass simply this event. That's it. So that's how we simply set up a loop using a scheduler. So let me just show you how actually this will work. If you see in the data, there is no random string is there. If it is work, then it will add a random string. Looping using, and you can see even the logs also. Logs scheduler. So these are the 2 tasks that is scheduled. So if you see in the data, all the event rows have a random string. That means loop is worked. Okay, first caveat with this approach is you need to pass the wait time of 5. So to the bare minimum, if a loop have a 50 item, then 50 into 5, that's a 250 second, and that's too problematic. Like wait for a loop to happen, and that takes a 250 second, and that is totally not, I think, recommended. But you can lower it down. You can even put 1, but bubble don't recommend it. Even you put a 1, that means 50 item means 50 second it will take, and this is not a very good benchmark to loop over a things. And also bubble documentation suggests you should not process more than 100 item in a one time using this method. So if you have a list of 1000 item, you should not process, not use this method at all. So bubble has put have in documentation. Okay, so that's it about this method. How you like it, do comment it and do subscribe to my channel. Okay, next method, that is a recursive workflow. That kind of bubble recommend to loop over the when you have a list more than of the 100 item. So how that is done, same thing we will going to do. So again we have put a one button. Whenever someone click on this button, it will happen looping using recursive workflow. Okay, so this method is kind of similar to the last method that we have talked, but with a little twist. What is the twist? So here we have created a one API workflow that taking a one item at a time and then process it. What if instead of that, and we call it recursive, what will if we just take a item all event and it will take a complete list rather than simply a one item. I will tell you what is the main advantage of doing this. So how this will happen. So the same way we have written this logic, we will return here also. Okay, just to show you what exactly logic we are going. If you remember the first method, this is the more or less similar kind of thing we are going to do it. So first the operation that we need to perform, simply copy it and paste it here. And that will all item, all event, first item. So we will just always process the first item and then say to the move to the next iterate. So what will the next iteration will be? Schedule API workflow. The same, it will be the, because it's a looping, so we will call it again. And here current date and time and plus second will be 1. So each looping item have a difference of the 1. And all item we will pass all item minus item, all item, first item. So every time we are passing list same as all event but minus the first item, because if you see here first item we already have processed. And till when, just copy it, paste it, count greater than 0. Till the time my list is not empty, we are going to call it. So that's how it works. And automatically when a list is empty, it will simply stop. And this is how, I think, yes. And now we need to call it. How can we call it? Simply again we are going to here recursive workflow, simply use a function schedule API workflow, not schedule API workflow on the list. Looping with recursive, schedule it is immediately we just want to do all event will be do search for event. So that's how we are going to do it. Let me just check the list is empty. Now we are going to click on this looping with recursive work. So now immediately if you go in the logs and scheduler, yeah, it works pretty fast. So it do not wait for the logs to, because the list is small. If your list have a more than 100 item, then it's a recommendation to use this method and it will shows every here in a scheduler. Okay, so now we have discussed 4 methods. Now you are thinking what is the best way of doing it. So my recommendation is first decide, do you want to on client side or do you want to on server side? If you want to client side, use the starting 2 method, anyone, whatever you prefer. Do you want to go bubble natively, then the first one. If you want to use a plugin, then the second one. Pretty simple. Now if you want to do the server lift, then ask yourself a question, is this lift going to be more than 100 item? And one more thing, when you call this third method looping using a scheduler lift, that is we have used it, this method, the one caveat, user have to be on the client. User should not close the browser. If user is close the browser, it will not schedule your lift. So that is the one caveat. It should be less than 100 and then user should not close the browser. If you feel like user will close, it's better to use a recursive workflow. And also it have an interval of like minimum 5 as Bubble recommended. It will take a long time. And same with the recursive workflow also, because recursive workflow, here we need to pass 1 second, but because this simple operation, but for example, there is going to be 20, 15 step, then it will take the complete workflow will take a step and then we will increase it. So that is a one more caveat with that thing. So yeah, that is how looping works. If you have any question around looping, do comment it out. I'm happy to answer it. And or you can tag me on Twitter, that is Nocode Talks. There you can also ask the question. Hope you learn from it.